So my dad had a cabinet shop in an area of Tampa called Ybor City. And this is Tampa's Latin Quarter, if you don't know that. And it's where immigrants came in the early 1900s, my family included. And I worked in my dad's shop until I was about 20, maybe 22. And I was influenced by the people who worked there, the men and women that came out of there, and mostly immigrants. And when I started this Link collection, I wanted it to read like a novel. I wanted to follow the lives not only of the workers, but also of a boy who grows up in that shop. Not necessarily me, but someone very much like me. The result is Comets, and here's the book, thanks to Unsolicited Press and the beautiful work they did on the cover. And it's a collection of 12 stories. 6 of the stories follow the life of a through-line protagonist, Roberto, and the other 6 stories follow the lives of the people in the shop. And what this allowed me to do was to explore a number of themes, including the disparate and the disconnected lives of the characters. And tonight I'm going to read one of the stories. It's called Fly Away Home. It's about a 15-minute read, and then I guess I'll field a couple of questions before I pass it on to Mark and Rachel. Let me pull this aside and put the story up. Fly Away Home. Crazy Jimmy kept birds and walked around with bags under busy eyes that kept watch for the boy. A bony, vascular man with black receding hair. His clothes hung on him like a scarecrow that had the stuffing beaten out of it. His wife, Margie, had dry mouth and drank water all night. She peed a lot and read the Holy Bible during bouts of insomnia. Jimmy was a light sleeper, but when he slept, he dreamed of flying with his birds, flying not like a bird or a superhero, but treading his feet as if through water. In his imaginings, he would jump and kick hard and glide slowly behind his pigeons, rock doves, he called them. But he always struggled to keep up. When he fell behind, he'd use his arms to propel himself faster. If he stopped kicking, even for a moment, he would sink and be startled awake before he touched the ground. He wished to have that dream every night. He wished to be lighter than air. He wished to catch those pigeons and show them the way home. Jimmy bobbed and he jabbed the air and ducked and then raised his hands and did a little dance around an imaginary ring, even though there was no ring, just a makeshift shed with an uneven floor made from old pallets, scraps of plywood, and a rusted tin roof that covered a dozen pigeons who watched Jimmy and cooed from their cage. He punched the air and he thought about the money that he could make in the summer classic pigeon race. The rock doves were a mix of colors, a mix of white, brown, gray, and black. And they cooed and jostled in their 6-foot cage while Jimmy shadow boxed and spoke with them with beads of sweat rolling into his eyes and burning. He called each one by name: Horace, Lulu, Mr. President, Sugar Ray, Roberto Duran, and Johnny. Johnny was a stout bird that reminded him of the fireplug Sicilian with the cabinet shop in Tampa. The bird was industrious, always busy, and always came in dead last. Jimmy built cabinets out of his garage, but had learned the trade working for Johnny and still worked for him now and again. Jimmy went into business for himself when he and Margie bought the 5 acres of land in Dade City off of Highway 54. It was a place they would never leave. They could never leave. The birds knew this to be home. No matter where Jimmy drove to set them free, they found their way back here. Every so often, a bird would go missing while the others returned. And sometimes the missing bird would show up weeks or months after the others. And other times, the bird never came back. The reason remained a mystery. Sometimes birds lose their way or have an accident, and sometimes they become the victims of predators. That's right, Horse, Jimmy said to his breadwinner, jabbing the air, moving, ducking, and then a quick jab, cross, uppercut. "You're going to be my workhorse? How about you, Lulu? Oh yeah, Roberto, you going to fly in with me some cold motherfucking cash? Or you going to fight Sugar Ray again?" The 2 birds didn't get along. They once winked at each other, pecking and clawing, leaving a wreckage of feathers and smears of blood in the cage. "She would be mad at you for using bad words," the boy said, watching Jimmy. Jimmy spun around, startled. He didn't know. "I didn't know you were there." The skinny boy had pin-straight black hair, hazel eyes, and olive skin, and he wore a red cotton t-shirt, blue jeans, and dingy white Converse All-Stars. "Well, let's not tell her," Jimmy said, wiping the glisten of sweat from his forehead and rubbing his wet palms on his jeans. Jimmy had come out at sunrise to attend to the birds and to be there for the boy. He wanted everything a real father should be. He wanted to be everything a real father should be. Though still early, the sun was well above the horizon, and through the walls of the loosely constructed bird coop, a luminous shaft illuminated the boy in a heavenly light. "Were you a good boxer?" the boy said. "What do you think?" Jimmy said, bobbing his head like a fighter and throwing more jabs. The boy smiled and hooked his thumbs into his bulging front pockets. Whatever was hidden away in them was lumpy, like they were full of beans. Jimmy looked at the boy's pockets. The boy had secrets, and Jimmy had become accustomed to that. But the longer he looked at those pockets, the clearer the secret became, until at once it was no longer a secret, but a profound memory. Jimmy grabbed a measuring cup that hung on a rusty nail, and he scooped bird feed from a 40-pound bag while the boy watched. He opened the cage and he poured food into a communal trough, caressing each bird and talking sweetly to them. Seeing the food, the birds cooed and flapped their wings and pecked and scratched, making a racket as they vied for position and ate with gusto. The boy focused on the jagged vertical scars that ran along the insides of Jimmy's wrists. Jimmy tugged at the sleeves of his denim shirt. "Do they know their names?" the boy said. Jimmy addressed a gray rock dove that had his head held high as if he were better than the others. "¿Qué es su nombre?" he said, and then responded, "El Presidente," in a falsetto voice. The boy laughed and Jimmy smiled and rubbed his eyes and fought back a yawn. Margie had been up a better part of the night while Jimmy lay in bed with his hands on his chest like a corpse, listening to her pray quietly in the living room and thinking about the date on the calendar and what it meant. Margie prayed the rosary, and she repeated the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be until it became white noise. She recited the Bible passages, and one in particular stood out, one Jimmy knew to be her favorite. "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." Excuse me. "You don't pray like she does," the boy said. "I don't need to pray like her," Jimmy said. "She's missing something." "What is she missing?" Jimmy stared at the boy. He walked past the boy who stood just inside the shed, and he peered toward the house. Margie often sat on the front porch in the mornings, sipping coffee and staring at the winding shell drive that led from the main road. "She's in the flower garden," the boy said. She's there this time of year. They're for today." Jimmy understood the significance of the day, but he had other plans, and somehow the boy knew this. "You're not going with her," the boy said. Jimmy shook his head. "She'll be mad about that." Jimmy's father never married his mother. When he was 12, Jimmy had a chance encounter with the man at a Golden Gloves competition. The man was there with a boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Jimmy. Having been told by his mother who the man was, Jimmy approached him. The man took him aside, poked a finger in his chest and called him a bastard liar and said that his mother was a whore. Jimmy fought his half-brother that day, and he was disqualified after splitting the boy's nose open and beating him down to the canvas well after the bell. Jimmy bloodied the boy's face until it no longer resembled his own. Jimmy became the welterweight Ybor City Golden Gloves runner-up at 17. To psych himself up for matches, he would punch himself in the face and curse at his opponents in Spanish, which earned him the nickname Crazy Jimmy. Before his championship match, Jimmy punched himself so hard that he broke his own nose, which bled so badly, the match was forfeited. There was purity and punishment to fighting, and a release vowed for Jimmy at the end of his fists. But when Margie asked him to stop for their future, he did, though he continued to visit the gym and hit the bag when he needed to. 25 years on, Jimmy had no illusions that he could still fight, at least not another person. Scabs on the knuckles of his hands were evidence of that, and of the battle with a wall that would not give. Jimmy stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the brewing coffee pot, as if he could will it to happen faster. His eyes rose slowly toward a framed drawing that held a prominent place on the wall. The drawing was the face of a bright yellow sunflower with a hint of a green stalk jutting up from the bottom of the frame. The flower was drawn with crayon on a white sheet of paper. In neat block letters, Mateo was written in brown on the top left side. Jimmy made the pine frame himself and stained it with the same brown color as the center of the sunflower, knowing the boy would appreciate it. The boy had a great eye for detail. The boy. Jimmy couldn't bring himself to say his name. He thought that if he did, he would shatter into a million pieces like a fighter made of glass. Margie walked in from outside as Jimmy made their coffees, his black and Margie's with cream and 1 teaspoon of sugar. She put a hand to Jimmy's cheek, and he studied her once beautiful face, now tired and losing the battle to gravity, her wavy brown hair up in a ponytail flecked with gray, hazel eyes framed by crow's feet from reading the small type in her worn Bible. Jimmy thought about the way it used to be, the way Margie used to be, funny, horny, and they were good together. Any music would start her ass shaking and she could move. That was the Cuban in her. When they married, there wasn't even a Bible in the house. I heard you talking to your birds this morning, she said. Jimmy nodded. You were watering? They're beautiful this year, 12 feet tall. Mateo would be so proud. She held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at the scabs on Jimmy's knuckles. You're coming with me today, she said in a manner that was more asking than telling. Margie, it's been 10 years, Jimmy said, thinking of the boy who never aged. I don't care how long it's been, she raised her voice. There's no one there, Margie. He's not there. He's not there. Composing herself, she whispered, I need a place to go. I need a place to be. It's his birthday. Margie prayed, and she went to church and she tended her flowers, the boys' flowers, and stared at that damn driveway. And Jimmy punched walls and released his pigeons, and each time he longed for their safe return. I'm going to release my birds in Ocala, he said. It's the summer classic. Margie's face turned red as pressure built inside. He loves them, Jimmy said, then caught himself. The birds, he loved to watch them fly. Come with me. Jimmy reached for her hand. Margie put her coffee on the counter and stepped close to Jimmy to feel his warmth. Come outside with me and sit, she said, looking at the sunflower drawing. They walked to the backyard with their coffees and toward lawn furniture that faced a concentrated grove of sunflowers, 20 or 30 in all, packed tightly together, bright faces of yellow and brown smiling toward the sky and held to the earth by thick green stalks. Mateo would walk around with sunflower seeds bulging in his front pocket so he could secretly plant them, Margie said, watching the flowers, crinkling her eyes and smiling. He loved his sunflowers. The seeds, Jimmy said, as the memory blossomed. I used to tell him he could grow a little grove of sunflowers right out of his pockets. Jimmy looked deep into the sunflowers and he saw the boy staring blankly at him. And then he looked to his wife and he wondered how she summoned such strength. Jimmy groaned a bit when his sore back hit the chair and he thought about Roberto, Johnny's kid. A chicken had walked into the cabinet shop in Ybor City and Roberto goaded everyone into putting up $1 to see who could catch it. Jimmy won when he slipped on the sawdust that covered the slick concrete floor and he crushed the bird. Jimmy got a queasy stomach and was embarrassed at having to walk outside and bend over like a hinge with his hands on his knees and the boy watching him. Jimmy often looked at Roberto and he wondered what his boy would have been like at 20. The boys were the same age. Jimmy had thought of that day 1,000 times, but some mysteries weren't meant to be understood. Margie said she saw the school bus drive by in the distance and other cars as well. And she waited for Mateo to turn the corner and run up the driveway as he always did. And she listened to Jimmy's table saw screaming from the garage. But the boy never came. Jimmy should have been there to meet him. He knew someone should have been there to meet him. That's what any good father would have done. The bus had come and gone, and Mateo was 2 feet from the edge of his driveway when something caught his eye. He was a curious boy with a quick and crooked smile. Mateo turned away from the faint sound of his father's table saw, and he moved toward a sunflower just beyond the bus stop. One of his sunflowers, one that he had planted and nourished with water from his lunchbox. Mateo ran to the flower, And he dropped to his knees and he cleared away the grass and the weeds to ensure that the flower would thrive. He was so excited and focused on his accomplishment that he didn't hear the car pull over to the side of the road. He didn't hear the footsteps in the grass. He didn't notice the shadow that fell over him before the light was snatched away. Come with me to Ocala, Jimmy said. I'm supposed to release the birds at 10 o'clock this morning. If we leave now, we can just make it. And then I'll go with you this afternoon. We'll go together, I promise. Jimmy had only been to the cemetery once, and he decided on that day that he would not go back. The ground was empty. The boy was not there, and if the boy was not there, he was somewhere else. Jimmy loaded the portable bird cage into the back of the station wagon, and he carried the birds one by one from the shed to the car. Out of the driveway, he turned onto Highway 54, and he headed toward I-75, which would take them north to Ocala. Warm air blew through the open windows, easing the gamey bird smell and carrying with it a stray tail feather which flittered through the car like a little white ghost. They drove in silence at first, both looking up at a deep blue sky filled with a few puffy white clouds. And as they drove toward the interstate, Margie and Jimmy turned, almost in unison, toward a large property being cleared by bulldozers and tractors. The pines and the oaks that lined the driveway were gone, sacrificed for progress. That was a beautiful piece of land, Jimmy said. Margie nodded as if she agreed, but also as if she didn't care one way or the other. I heard the guy who sold it had it for 30 years, sold it for millions. It's going to be a shopping mall. Before they reached the end of the property, just 2 miles down from their own, something else caught their attention and Jimmy tapped the brake. Margie and Jimmy exchanged looks. Jimmy pulled the car over to the side of the road, his stomach turning in knots. The bulldozers had stopped moving, and the workmen were gathered around a curious sight. In the middle of an open field that was now just dirt and fallen trees, there stood a concentrated little grove of sunflowers, 30 or 40 in all, packed tightly together, standing 12 to 14 feet tall. However, the men were not looking up at the flowers to marvel at their broad, bright faces, but instead were staring at a singular spot on the ground, each man's face a dismal mask. Please go, Jimmy, go now, Margie said urgently. Margie's hands were tightly weaved together and her lips were quietly moving in prayer. Jimmy took one last look at the sunflowers and he pulled onto Highway 54, his mind racing. It can't be. He looked in the rearview mirror at the boy who sat quietly staring out the window with the sun shining on his face, and Jimmy was comforted. Margie asked what he was looking at, and Jimmy said nothing. The boy's presence was not his to share. They turned on the I-75, and Jimmy felt the urge to engage Margie in conversation, but he knew her mind was at work trying to reconcile the flowers, as was his, so he remained quiet for the duration. Jimmy pulled his station wagon past a large banner that read Central Florida Pigeon Club Summer Classic. He could see Margie's eyes open wide at the zoo of people and vehicles that packed the area. A woman wearing an orange vest waved them toward a parking spot. It was the first time Jimmy had brought Margie to a race. Margie waited solemnly by the car, wringing her hands together as Jimmy paid the entrance fee and exchanged pleasantries with the race officials, whom he knew from previous races. Jimmy walked back to the car with one of the officials who affixed an aluminum band to each of the pigeons. Upon each bird's arrival back in Dade City, Jimmy would remove the bands and place each one in a lockbox to record the time of arrival. Money was won based on the ratio of distance and airspeed, if the birds made it back. Jimmy opened the back of the station wagon, which excited and agitated the birds. A few of the birds flew toward the cage door while the others continued to peck at grain that Jimmy had tossed in the cage to keep them occupied. When Jimmy swung the cage door open, Horse and some of the more eager birds took to the sky. He prodded the others out, and they flew toward a white and wispy cotton candy cloud that to Jimmy resembled an old man with an unruly beard. They stood together, Jimmy and Margie, watching the birds shrink from sight. Jimmy looked around for the boy, but Mateo was nowhere in sight. He was certain Mateo would be present for the release, and he felt himself growing anxious. Jimmy turned to the sky and he watched one pigeon separate from the others. And he took 2 steps forward and he reached his hands to the sky. In his heart, Jimmy knew something profound had been lost, and he felt the familiar urge to fly away, to forsake the ground. So that's Fly Away Home. And what I wanted to do with the story was to explore 2 people navigating a horrific tragedy and how they deal with it. And it's part of the character. And I mentioned through line protagonist Roberto in this particular story. He's not in this story, but as I said, he's in 6, and it follows the life of a young boy growing up. And if you don't know anything about Ybor City, there are chickens running around all over this area of Tampa that were brought over by Cubans that came here in the early 1900s, and they're still there. They're running all over wild in this area of Tampa. So when my dad had the cabinet shop, it wasn't surprising if a chicken walked in every now and again, because with a cat running after it usually.
Yeah.
But thank you for listening. If there's any questions, I can field a couple of questions before Mark and Rachel take over.
Is Jimmy based off of someone in particular, or
Yes.
just a character?
There absolutely was a guy in our shop who had homing pigeons, and I won't give his name, but he was a little crazy, and he would often follow us on jobs with his own car and release them from the back of his car wherever we went, and they would fly back to his property, which was north of Tampa. So, every story in my book has a seed of truth to it. And of course, when you work in a shop for so many years and tragedies do befall people, like any other workplace. And what you find when you read the book is that the character Roberto doesn't really know what the characters are like outside the shop, just as when we work with people for years and years, we may not really know them and what they're going through. And my thought in this, that listen, everybody's going through something. Everybody is. And so if you see that person on the highway and they're pissed off, or that person at work that's not talking, you don't really know what's going on in their life. It could be something serious they just don't want to talk about. And I think that comes out and it's revealed in this book that everybody has a life outside of the workplace. And you're just not privy to what's going on and the angst that they live with.
Oh, also, I'm a fellow colleague. I'm an English professor at Kaiser University as well. And I didn't say this earlier, but Joe's students love him. They come into my class like a next term and they go, oh, and Professor Costa, he just let us. Well, I'm not going to let you.
I pay them.
They just super enjoy him and they think he is so charismatic. So, and it's, they're telling me about this. I'm like, yeah, I'm not so bad either. But
thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it. My fan club.
Humbled himself.
Well, thank you. If there's no questions, then I'm going to hand it off to Mark and Rachel. By the way, comments. Thank you, Summer at Unsolicited Press. It's available everywhere, as your book is, I'm sure. It's on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and on the Unsolicited Press site. And it's a digital book, and it's also an audio book available on iTunes. So check it out. That's the marketing guy in me still coming back.
Thanks. Hey, Rachel.
Yes, sir.
You awake?
I am. Sorry, I was texting Meg. She's asking me how this was going. And I was like, we're about to start. My daughter's very excited. Did you want me to start?
Yeah, I wanted you to start. You were set up for the intro.
I missed the whole part before I got here where you and Joe were deciding who was going to start. I apologize.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So this is a chapter from Love and Genetics. My baby brother and I were driving to get pizza during Thanksgiving 2006. There's only so many times you can eat turkey in a 2-day period before you just need something that's not turkey. As we've grown up, Vincent has become one of my best friends. A tall and handsome boy, he is brash and funny and gentle all at the same time. He was studying at the University of Kentucky at the time And while we drove into town, we were lamenting the way our parents' relationship had devolved into what seemed like one long bicker. Mom and dad were becoming mom versus dad, at least a little. Truthfully, what had driven us from the house, even more than leftovers, was the battle of the snap. We had been playing poker over taco chips and wine, and I innocently noted, while lamenting my diminishing pile of nickels, that Dad snapped his cards with a certain smug vigor as he displayed his winning hand, one card at a time. Snap, 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 full house. My comment was met with raucous agreement, and as the conversation escalated in both volume and wine-driven silliness, a voice rose up from the other side of the room. I hate it when your father snaps cards. It reminds me of when we were young. One long bicker. It was weird because growing up, we had largely experienced our parents as a team, a couple who loved steadily through years of raising a family while Dad preached on Sundays and Mom managed a one-income household with resourcefulness. So as silliness turned serious and card snapping brought up long dead topics like gambling debts we had never heard of, we grew unsettled. There were clearly things we did not know about. Man, it's good to get out of the house, he sighed as we turned out of the driveway, probably a little too full of wine to be driving. Mom and Dad are making me crazy. Cautiously, into the dark, I said, I know, they push each other's buttons all the time. We made it to the top of the hill before I chanced, I think they've got things they need to talk about, you know? No doubt. Pause, signal, right-hand turn. What do you mean? Oh, nothing. Hastily, I backpedaled. It's just, you can't be married for 30 years and not have things to work through, that's all. Pause. Why? What did you think I meant? He shifted in his seat, adjusting the rearview mirror as we cruised along Jessamine Station Road. What do you know, Vincent? Why? What do you know, Rachel? The car fell meaningfully silent. I leaned forward in my seat, unable to keep the words from tumbling out of my mouth. Can you keep a secret? Who would I tell? No, really, you have to swear to me that you will. I was about to make him promise his firstborn child when he stopped the car short of the beckoning neon of Little Caesars and looked me quizzically in the eye under the glow of the parking lot light. Is this about our secret brother? It had been 6 years since the first revelation from my mother, and now I was sitting in the front seat of my baby brother's 1991 Honda piece of crap in the parking lot of Little Caesars, home of the hot and ready, finding out that he knew. My whole world shifted again, and I was stunned. Yes, I am talking about our secret brother, I yelped at him. What the hell, you know? Vincent was disappointingly matter-of-fact, possibly already thinking about pizza. Yeah, Mom told me a couple years ago when I was moping about being the black sheep of the family. She was like, you think you're the black sheep of the family? You have no idea. He grinned at me widely. So she told me that her and Steve had a baby before they were married. We have a secret brother. Cool, right? This is how conversations go with Vincent. But he was right. It was cool. The drive home was too short. The hot pizza burned my lap as we wandered back and forth where he was, what he was like, who he was. With only 3 minutes or so to speculate, we arrived at the conclusion that no matter what, he was probably a spectacular human being, much like ourselves. Intelligent, handsome, charming, funny, definitely. Our conversation bounced around the car like a helium balloon, inflated with the sheer happiness of the idea of him. We sat in the driveway outside our parents' house, my burning lap notwithstanding, and agreed that we wanted to find him. I told Vincent I had looked into it. I wrote a letter to Oprah, I confessed. He barked out a laugh. You dummy. Are you kidding me? Did you get anything back? I shrugged. Nah, just a form letter. I started trying to look online, but it's so much more complicated than I thought it would be, so I surrendered. Our conversation was halted by the front door opening. Dad called out, "What's going on out there? Bring in the pizza already, would you?" For the rest of the night, our secret brother was like the silk thread of a spider's web between us. He would catch my eye and raise an eyebrow like he does, or smirk, and I knew he was thinking about our older brother we had never known. Before that night and our short, honest trip to Little Caesars, I sometimes wondered if I had imagined the whole conversation with my mom. She never mentioned it to me again after that first time. Over the years, the reality of my secret brother had faded into the idea of him, which faded even further until all I had was a vague tickle in the back of my mind from time to time. But not anymore. Vincent and I sat around the house that night, fat and happy with knowledge, eating pizza and probably snapping our cards with self-satisfaction. He was out there, and we finally each had someone to talk to about all the questions and hopes we were holding on to. I'm not sure we knew in that moment exactly what we were hoping for, but it grew into this. He was real, and we would find him.
Thanks, Rachel. For anybody on the call who doesn't know our story, I'm the secret brother. So that helps connect the dots probably a little bit. The book itself is the story of the, let's say, adoption reunion, discovering the family that was, and then a follow-on second half of the book is all about a gestational surrogacy, because Rachel was a gestational surrogate for my wife and I, allowing us to have our own children. But I think the readings we've chosen today are more focused on the reunion part. So if you're more interested in the surrogacy part, I'm going to be like Joseph and show the wonderful cover that the good folks at
Ooh, which I really love.
Yes. So the part I'm going to read is a portion of the early exchanges between Marilyn and I. So Marilyn is Rachel's mother and my biological mother. And at this point in the chronology, we haven't actually met yet. We've exchanged early messages in writing only, as well as a couple of photos. Another thing that's done in adoption reunions are the exchange of non-identifying information, which is essentially a brief self-description and a medical history, something that the government or the adoption agency would keep on file and allow that to be shared if somebody came searching for their biological connections. I got home from work one day that spring and found a small brown envelope from Marilyn in our mailbox. She had sent me an email warning a couple of days prior that a package was coming. I nested the envelope among the pile of other mail that I collected from the box and brought it into the house along with my work bag and a few groceries that I had stopped to pick up on the way home. It had been a typical day at the office, meetings, phone calls, analysis. But now I was home and it was time to walk the dog, unwind a little, and start to think about what to do for dinner. I dumped the groceries in the mail in a big pile on the kitchen island counter. Then I picked up the brown envelope and placed it deliberately aside, face up, and aligned with its edges true to the black granite tiles of the countertop, before turning back to the detritus of other mail and the perishable food items that really ought to be sequestered away into the fridge for safekeeping. I paused for a moment and heard only my breath. Then I slowly began to unpack the groceries, working mechanically, carefully. Each individual item was placed into its correct location in the pantry or fridge until all were stowed. It was a surreal dance that moved with the languid purposefulness of a celestial orbit. To this day, I don't know whether it was avoidance or the thrill of building anticipation that was guiding my behavior that night. As I worked, I would steal glances at the brown envelope with my name on it. With the groceries put away, I turned next to the pile of other mail, sorting through one by one until all were placed in the recycling. Then I stood alone in our quiet home. Tina was still on her way home from work. It felt like there was some sort of slim journal or notepad inside that envelope. I opened the seal trepidatiously. I could now sense Marilyn's emotional baggage glowing through the plain brown wrapper. This was not what I had been looking for. I had no real interest in resolving her issues. I just wanted to know my roots, my siblings, and my potential future for my genetic line. I pulled a notebook out of the envelope, and a yellowed piece of paper, of folded paper, came free and wafted to the floor like a kite without a string. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. A letter from the Children's Aid Society of Metropolitan Toronto. It was addressed to Miss Marilyn Christie. And it read, I apologize that my Alexa went off behind me. I hope you can't hear that. Letter to Marilyn, undated. Dear Marilyn, I'm glad to be able to tell you that Stephen's adoption was finalized last year. And though the social worker who placed him has left the agency, I have her notes, which she left on the record. She described him as a bright child. He was a bit fretful the first month after he was placed with his adoptive parents, but when he settled down, he became a happy, responsive child. He is big, solid, and all boy. He was doing well when the adoption was made final. I think I told you that his new father is a professional person, and both he and his wife are the kind of people who can give stimulation to a child. They were experienced parents when Stephen was placed with them. Apparently, all the relatives and friends were very much attracted to Stephen too. I hope what I can tell you will help, Marilyn, as you think about Stephen. Give my regards to Stephen Sr. You have my very best wishes for happiness in your coming marriage. Yours sincerely, Miss E. Lemon. I put the letter down on top of the now empty envelope and turned to the notebook, a plain, small scratch pad of lined paper tied up in a simple straw ribbon, about 25 pages total, with the first half dozen already torn out. I untied the ribbon and lifted the mahogany brown cover page. Inside, along with several pages of handwriting, I discovered a typed letter on a plain 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It was a letter from Marilyn. Mark, this package is necessary for me to do this connection rightly. I have no idea if you need or want to hear this story like I can tell it. After we connected, but before I saw your picture, I went alone to a retreat center, my personal refuge, and sat for hours by a pond and thought and cried and wrote. What I wrote is in the enclosed notepad. It is a first draft, very messy, but I choose not to refine it. The story is ragged, so be it. I have huge reservations sending this to you. I don't want to impose on what you might not want to receive. But this has been in my heart to say since January 1973. To help you, I found a picture of me taken when I was 16, shortly after your birth. This is the girl who held you when you were born. This is the girl's heart that you heard as a lub-dub when your ears first comforted the sound. Somehow I thought it might help you if you had a face to connect to that story, maybe make it real. The first half of the story, as I reread it, is really written by this girl. To say it is a story of a life and death struggle is not to overdramatize, but also it's a story of beauty out of context. Your life and mine are and were beautiful. Our story, Steve's and mine, is not a story of a sordid life. There were no drugs or alcohol, no abuse or mental illness, no promiscuity. He was a disciplined athlete and I was a vital girl. Your birth was not celebrated in a beautiful way, except in this girl's heart, until at last you were with your adoptive family. And may I say, I love that I've seen their faces in your wedding picture. And then your chances really began. The second half of what I've written as I reread it, this was not consciously planned, is for me now. It is my heart for you as a man today. Maybe that's what I dread sending you. I want you to know that what I've written is very deep and very true to who I am and how I process life, but in no way presumes that you need me in any way or even need to hear what I have to say. I just once have to say it. So this is sort of my caveat, to say that for me, this is an important piece of knowing and being known, but also to affirm that this is not where I want to stay, not what I want to dwell on. I guess, frankly, I fear your rejection. So, because so much is at stake, here it is. Handwritten at the bottom of the last page was, "This is very good," signed Marilyn. I moved on to the handwritten pages of the notebook itself. And unfortunately, we don't have time tonight to read Marilyn's entire journal, but in it, she describes the experience of my birth and adoption. She also explained the aged letter from the Children's Aid Society when she writes, "There was a period of time when a birth mother could change her mind and reclaim the child. I knew that. It made everyone nervous. I also knew I would never do that. I had to be fierce too to survive. I wrote 2 letters to the adoption agency during the time before the adoption was final. I had to hear if you were okay. I received 1 reply, which I've kept these 34 years. I think to prove to myself that you were real and not a dream. I'm sending it to you. I don't need it anymore." Her story was one of heartbreaking bravery. As a 16-year-old, she had moved into a home for girls in Toronto and was left to navigate this experience more or less completely alone. The more I read, the more I connected myself to this lonely girl's experience, slowly comprehending that this was my story too. I was sobbing quietly well before I finished reading, and by the time I was done, my body racked as I doubled over, staggered by the words she had written. Tears coursed mercilessly from my eyes. I have not cried like that before or since. Even as I stood there shaking, I was not entirely sure why I was crying. It was a half hour before I could compose myself. Clearly, I had more emotional issues connected to being adopted than my mind had let on. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the journey yet to come, and set about making dinner for Tina and myself, trying to find some comfort in the ordinary. Later that night, I struggled. I struggled emotionally, not being able to share the contents of that envelope with Tina, my closest partner in this life. And I struggled to find a response that I could send to Marilyn, though I know that she would be waiting on one desperately. And that's the end of my reading tonight. And if you want to read Marilyn's journal, the whole thing is verbatim in the book from Unsolicited Press.